of the questions I'm most commonly asked about cables is, why is my cable looser at the left hand side? So this is an example, and there's my last knit of my cable, and I've got quite a droopy section here. So compare that with the right hand side, where there's hardly any float of yarn between the purl and the knit, but here there's quite a long loose section. So on this sample I worked the first two cables perfectly normally. Then I changed one thing, and here is my edge stitch. So there's the edge stitch before, kind of blousy, and here is my new edge of cable stitch. Looks much tidier. And here is that left edge of cable with no discernible floaty bits there. And there's the right edge of cable, so that's just the same. And the only thing I did was change the way I purled the first stitch after the last knit. What we need to look at is what happens to the yarn when it leaves a knit and enters a purl. With a normal stitch mount and normal stitch rotation, the yarn exits this knit stitch back here, and we come in and do this purl stitch. And even with the stitches really close together when we work them, the purl yarn has to go almost up to the top of the needle before it gets taken into the stitch. So in effect we've done a yarn under. The yarn leaves here and comes round to there, and so that gives us that little floaty bit of yarn. So the change that I made between the first two cables and the second two cables was simply this. I leave my knit stitch, I bring my yarn to the purl position, I let the stitches get nice and close together on the tips before I work them, and then I rotate the yarn clockwise around the needle, the opposite way to usual, as I make that first purl. I call that an alternative rotation purl. Then I just work the others exactly as normal. So we're on the wrong side row, so I'm purling 6 across here. And when I go from a purl to a knit, I don't have that same issue. The yarn exits the purl here, and it enters the knit down at the bottom of the needle. So it's just a very short distance. So it's not the purl to the knit, it's when you go from the knit to the purl. And here we have it again. This is where I rotated my yarn the opposite way around the needle last row. So in order to knit that one, I knit into the front of the stitch. It's just that the front of the stitch is smiling to the right. Normally the front of the stitch smiles to the left, but the front of the stitch, when you rotate the yarn the opposite way, faces the opposite way. And I've knit it. But here is my first purl, so this is the one I have to watch out for, and I go into my purl, I rotate the yarn the opposite way, and that stitch will present smiling in the opposite direction on the next row. Now I just go back to normal. So if you just get into the habit, every time you go from a knit to a purl, of rotating that first purl in the opposite direction, then you will almost undoubtedly tidy up the left hand side of your cables. We'll do the same thing on the right side row. So I have to be observant for any strangely mounted stitches. I'm going from a purl to a knit, no problem, just as usual. Now here's that strangely mounted knit stitch, so I'm working into the front, but you could just think of it as working it so the stitch is happy, doesn't have crossed legs. And that's actually a good reminder that you're going to work that next stitch alternatively. So you work the first purl after a knit every time it occurs, whether it's on a right side row or a wrong side row, and that will improve the appearance of the left edge of the cable. Alternative rotation, and off I purl. You'll soon become used to it. Now, just to prove the point, here is where I knit, and there is where I purled normally, and there is the floaty bit of yarn. And if I turn this over to the private side, that floaty bit of yarn is here, and it's where I've gone from a knit to a purl. In the next part of this series, we'll take a look at how we can fix cables easily and surgically.